Everyone in New York has heard the city's urban legends. They're the kind of stories people trade on subway rides and at late-night diners, half joke, half warning, so common they've become part of the city's personality. There are 10 that everyone knows by heart. 1. The man in the mirror. 2. The Headless Horseman who rides a motorcycle through the night. 3. The faceless man who lives by taking someone else's life. 4. The cloaked figure that spreads fire wherever he walks. 5. A puppet that loves to play games. 6. A hidden platform 9 3/4 that opens to a magical school. 7. The monsters that visit children who can't sleep. 8. Horror videotapes that kill anyone who watches them. 9. Vending machines that dispense impossibilities. 10. Collect all 7 Dragon Balls and summon a dragon that grants wishes. They sound ridiculous together, but that's New York for you. Equal parts absurd and deadly earnest. People tell them for fun, then cross to the other side of the street like it's an exorcism. What nobody suspected was that these stories didn't grow out of coincidence or urban imagination. They were created, staged, and then, somehow, made real. Someone had been playing with the city's myths, and the myths had answered back. That someone was Levi. Levi didn't appear like a mastermind in a movie. He didn't wear a villain's cape or pronounce schemes in a lair. He fit into crowds, into shadows, into the behind-the-scenes corners of the Marvel world. Editing rooms, prop warehouses, VFX studios, the small offices where writers stitch ideas together. He was the sort of person who could tweak a script here, plant an image there, seed a rumor in a forum at 2 in the morning, and watch it bloom into something else. At first it seemed like an eccentric prankster's hobby. Tweaking an urban legend to be a little weirder in a film, making a prop in a show behave oddly. But Levi didn't stop at artifice. He pushed. The myths began to slip from fiction into reality. A motorcycle whose rider had no head, faces in mirrors that weren't reflections, a vending machine that swallowed coins and spat out a live thing. Each prank dovetailed with a rumor. Each rumor gathered momentum until the boundary between staged spectacle and genuine anomaly evaporated. The Marvel Universe reacted like a fevered audience. On-screen anomalies spawned off-screen sightings, films fed the city's nightmares, and the nightmares fed the films. Directors called it method marketing. Producers called it viral genius. The people who knew better didn't know it was Levi pulling the strings. They thought it was brilliant PR or an elaborate ARG. No one suspected the man in the shadows who liked to watch what would happen once fiction escaped the soundstage. Why would someone do this? Vanity, curiosity, a desire to prove he could change the world by changing a story, maybe all three. Levi liked puzzles and consequences. He liked to see how far a rumor could run when someone pushed on the right nerves, fear, nostalgia, longing for the magical. He liked the look on faces when the impossible stopped being fictional and began to rearrange reality. You haven't heard the rest of the rumors yet. Not because they aren't real, but because saying them out loud tends to make them behave badly. This is not a textbook in supernatural phenomena. This is a behind-the-scenes story. It's role play and reality blended together, heavy with film and animation trickery, with the sagas of heroes and extras and people who make the city's myths feel whole. Levi wasn't interested in becoming a recognized villain. He preferred being the unseen hand, the glitch in the post-production. He wasn't after glory, and there was no femme lead waiting in the wings to save or to suffer. This was his experiment. He was the puppet master and, in a very literal sense, the puppeteer of the puppet that liked to play games. The city shifted under his touch. People stopped asking whether those stories were true. They asked when the next one would happen. That was Levi's favorite sound, expectation. He kept moving, planting the next idea like a seed, watching the city tilt toward it. He was the culprit behind the weirdness that had infected the Marvel world. No announcement, no manifesto, just a long series of small edits and sly placements. If you live in New York, keep your eyes on mirrors. Don't trust vending machines. And for God's sake, if someone tells you to collect 7 Dragon Balls, don't start looking for them on a whim. My advice is the sort you only get once. Take the legends seriously, but not as warnings. Think of them as invitations. Levi isn't done. He never is. The next prank, the next staged scare, the next filmic trick could be the point where the city's many stories stop being stories at all. Chapter 1. Three Strange Stories. Late at night in Midtown High, New York City. As the sky blackened and the halls emptied, the school settled into the hush that follows the day's bustle. In one of the activity rooms, a single light burned. Inside, 4 students, 2 boys and 2 girls, were playing poker. "Hey, don't tell me you forgot what we're doing. It's almost midnight," one of the girls said. "Oh, please, of course I remember. When the clock strikes 12, what do we do again?" "Mike, you're such an idiot. You light a candle, stand in front of the mirror, say the incantation at 12, then blow the candle out. Rumor says you'll see something interesting. If you can't even remember that, how are you a member of the occult club?" "Heh, maybe Mike's here to find true love," another boy quipped. "No." Mike's face went red, but he hid it with a forced laugh. He stood up, stifling his discomfort behind bravado. "Fine. I like this sort of stuff. I'll go first. Just watch." The others shrugged and leaned back to watch. The man in the mirror urban legend had been spreading on the web lately. They were curious to see if it was real. Mike picked up a candle he'd brought, lit it, and stood before the full-length mirror. He watched his own reflection, holding the tiny flame, felt nothing particularly eerie, and almost laughed. Occult nonsense wasn't his thing. He'd only joined the club to meet girls. Still, he played the part. "Keep an eye on the time for me," he told them. "Don't blame me if you miss it." "We're watching. Hope you don't pee yourself," one of them said. Mike flipped him off, and when the clock struck midnight, the 3 watchers shouted in unison. Mike blew the candle out, looked up at his reflection, shrugged, and turned away. "Looks like it was a hoax," he said, nudging the others. "What's with those faces?" They weren't laughing. One by one, they staggered back, pale and frozen, their expressions turning to terror. In the mirror, Mike's reflection did not turn with him. It still faced them, wearing a slow, wrong smile. A scream tore through the room. From several hundred meters away, in an old security booth, Levi crossed his legs and sipped his coffee casually. He wasn't surprised. He'd engineered the whole thing. 2.5 months ago, Levi had come to this world. He'd discovered, via the strange, ubiquitous posters and images he'd seen everywhere, that he'd arrived in this chaotic Marvel world. Fortunately for him, he'd also arrived with a plug-in. Name, Leeway. Talent, 1. Belief in evil gods. The more people know of your existence, the stronger your power becomes. 2. Strange body. Can transform into an uncanny body. Can be harmed only by supernatural forces. 3. Unlocked. Unlocks when reputation reaches 10,000. Current reputation, 6,078. Levi called it his reputation system. As his renown grew, so would his powers. At first he'd been careful, just another security guard on a night shift, until he realized how the system worked. Personal notoriety translated into points. Once he unlocked the second talent, he got bolder. He learned he could fabricate weird stories, seed them into the internet and local rumor mill, and as people reacted, his reputation would rise. Hence, the man in the mirror was born. As fate would have it, Levi guarded Midtown High and had overheard members of the occult club planning a midnight stunt. He had arranged everything, a carefully staged reflection, the synchronized reactions, the perfect timing. Hearing the scream from the hallway, he smiled, stood, and patted the old guard in the neighboring booth on the shoulder. "Old Martin, I'm off shift," Levi said. "It's late. Go home and get some sleep. Night's just getting started. Being young, I miss that," Martin grumbled with a chuckle. Levi changed out of his uniform, waved goodbye to his colleague, who looked like a retired comic book extra, and headed back to his rented apartment. He took a quick shower, left the TV on to make it seem as though someone was home, and then, as he had become accustomed to doing, transformed into his strange body and floated out through the ceiling. The strange body was more than just a costume. It was immune to ordinary damage and granted abilities that sounded like legend: flight, invisibility, possession. It didn't care for sunlight. It also carried a contagion of the mind. Anyone who stared directly at it risked losing their sanity. Little by little, their grip weakened. Levi drifted over the city until he landed by a shopping mall. There he dressed the part: tight black suit, a motorcycle helmet with dark lenses. Up close, behind the visor, there was nothing. No face, just empty dark where a head should be. Then he picked out a group of thugs who looked like they'd been asking for trouble, dealt with them, appropriated a motorcycle, and started a new rumor: the Headless Horseman. That night, the nightlife suffered. Small gangs and troublemakers found themselves beaten and terrified by a headless attacker. After he'd finished with a particularly rowdy group, Levi returned his costume, slipped back into the body of a sleeping man in a nearby house, and floated with a malicious grin into the man's consciousness. The man stirred, climbed out of bed with purpose, and padded into his study. His wife slept on, oblivious. Levi used the man's hands to type posts, threads, pictures. Everywhere people would see them. Shocking! The headless knight was right next to me, photos inside. Family, help! I actually saw the man in the mirror. Help! I wake up with back pain and feel like my body moved last night. His fingers flew over the keys, each post seeded like a rumor. He fed and stoked 3 stories: Headless Horseman, Man in the Mirror, and the Sleepless Body, and watched the threads spread. Of course, there were skeptics and trolls. Levi met them all in the comments, baiting, taunting, inflaming. The more people argued, the more exposure he gained. A soft noise from the bedroom hinted that the wife had been disturbed. She wandered into the study, squinting at the glow of the monitor. Seeing her husband awake and furiously typing in the middle of the night, she snapped, "Why aren't you sleeping? You look like you have energy to spare. Come on, get to bed." Levi turned and saw her, a burly woman, eyes heavy with sleep and annoyance. He couldn't help the curl at the corner of his mouth. Not bad. Another seed planted, another ripple set in motion. The night was young, and his 3 stories were only just beginning to grow. Chapter 2. Peter Parker. Levi slept until the afternoon, grabbed a quick lunch, and hurried to work, still yawning. "Hey, Lee, you look like you had a lot of fun last night," his colleague Hay teased from the security room, flashing a grin. Levi shrugged. "Yeah, last night was busy. Don't ask how many people I kept awake." He was changing into his security uniform when a middle-aged man with a serious face appeared in the doorway. "Captain, morning," Levi said casually. "Lee, you're late. Something happened on campus last night. Be more vigilant tonight. Do more patrols. Take this seriously." "Got it. I'll check things out." Levi nodded. He knew the captain was referring to the stunt pulled by some troublemakers the night before. They'd caused a scare. Levi had treated it like a joke. He'd planned to mess around a bit rather than be strict. Still, he straightened his sunglasses, tapped the brim of his cap, and strolled out across the campus with his hands behind his back and a smile on his face. It was after school, and the grounds were full of students doing extracurriculars, laughing, shouting, completely unaffected by last night's incident. Levi's sunglasses hid his gaze as he scanned the crowd. He liked the view. "You've done well for yourself, kid," he muttered under his breath. A textbook thudded against his chest, cutting him off. Looking down, Levi found a girl with long black hair and a panicked expression. "Don't tell me," he said, one eyebrow raised. "You came to get me to help Parker, didn't you?" The girl, Jessica, was already out of breath. "If you know, hurry up. If you don't come, Parker's going to get beaten to a pulp." "You're in a hurry, Jessica? They're just jerks. At worst, Parker gets roughed up a little." "That's not okay." She grabbed Levi's hand and dragged him toward the teaching building. Levi didn't resist. Peter Parker was, well, Peter Parker, the scrawny kid everyone pushed around. He hadn't been bitten by any radioactive spider yet. He was still the awkward, downtrodden version who got tripped in the hall. Flash Thompson was the opposite, big, athletic, and a perennial bully. Jessica, for all her current teenage indignation, would later become someone else entirely, famous, dangerous, and far from powerless. But right now, she was just another student standing up for a friend. Levi had chosen this school on purpose. Important people passed through its halls, and making the right impression was worth something. Reputation, influence, leverage. Peter Parker alone was worth a surprising portion of that value. So Levi made a point of showing up where it mattered. The corridor inside the teaching building was narrow and mostly empty. Rounding a corner, they found a cluster of tall, muscular students leaning against the lockers. Flash and his football teammates. "Thompson," Jessica snapped, "what do you think you're doing?" Before she could say more, Levi stepped forward, draped an arm around Jessica's shoulders, and marched toward the group. He put a hand on the tallest boy's shoulder. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate. "We're just standing here talking. Is that against the rules?" Flash replied, trying for a swagger. You're being a nuisance, Levi said simply. Flash and his cronies bristled, but Levi didn't argue. With a single, practiced motion, he shoved them aside. They were large and strong, but the push sent them stumbling back as if hitting a wall. Where they had been standing slumped a smaller figure, the unmistakable image of Parker, thin, in a wrinkled white shirt and a battered black vest, his glasses crooked on his nose and his brown hair sticking up. He looked like he'd been through the ringer. Parker, you okay? Levi asked. Parker adjusted his glasses and tried to force a smile. I'm fine. Levi slid an arm under Parker's and guided him away without turning back to Flash. He gave Jessica a quick wink. She nodded and fell in step beside them. From the corner of his eye, Levi saw Flash scowl. Let them go just like that? One of the teammates grumbled. What, beat them again? Not after the last time. Flash's hands clenched. A few days earlier, he'd tried something against Levi and been taken down in short order. The scar of that embarrassment made him grind his teeth. We'll train, he muttered. We'll be ready. Outside the classroom, Jessica kept up the protest. You can't just let them bully him. I can't start a fight with students, Levi said, calm. If I did, I'd be fired. He'd already made his mark here. One scuffle had been enough to establish him as a mysterious martial artist, at least in the kids' imaginations. They called him a master. They respected him, sometimes feared him. That reputation kept Flash from taking their hostility out on Levi directly, so Flash funneled it toward Parker instead. Parker tried to brush it off. I'm used to it, he said, though his voice gave him away. If you always put up with it, they'll only get bolder. Jessica said, you'll keep getting hurt. What should I do? Parker asked, earnest and helpless. Levi smiled, showing those white teeth. Simple, he said. Parker, do you want to learn how to fight? Chapter 3. The Third Talent. A few evenings later, the afterglow stained half the sky a bloody red. In a secluded grove on campus, an odd conversation echoed between the trees. Oh, I can't take it anymore. I really can't. Please, let me go. Hold on, Parker. Embrace the wonders of the human body. I feel like my thigh muscles are about to tear. Have you ever had the cheese pizza from the shop across the gate? When you pull the slice away, the cheese stretches and then snap. If you pull harder, it breaks. My legs feel like that. Shut up. Save your breath. Talking like Jessica doesn't help you perform better. Parker and Jessica were in perfect horse stance. Parker was whining while Jessica endured grimly. Levi, having found a hammock somewhere, lay back in it, chewing an apple, and giving what passed for martial arts instruction to his two new pupils. In truth, Levi only had a vague idea of formal training, but after reading scores of novels and watching endless dramas, he'd picked up enough authoritative-sounding phrases to bluff convincingly. Parker and Jessica believed him, largely because Levi looked the part. Familiarity had made Parker bold. His old shyness had vanished, and his incessant chatter grated on Levi's nerves. Jessica mostly stayed out of it and smiled helplessly at her friend. Okay, that's enough for today. Levi clapped once. We're done. Parker collapsed to the ground, gasping. Jessica wiped sweat from her brow and sat down, rubbing her aching thighs. She'd kept the stance better than Parker, but still felt it in every muscle. Lee, practicing martial arts won't make my thighs thicker, will it? Girls always worry about this kind of thing. An image of Chun-Li flashed through Levi's head, and he laughed. Of course not. Do you think my thighs are thick? Well, thicker than Parker's. Levi didn't want to argue. He made an excuse, hurried home, and checked his panel. The 3 strange stories that had been spreading online and in real life, and the little contributions Parker and the others had used to boost Levi's reputation, had finally paid off. His reputation value had passed 10,000, unlocking a third talent. Name, Leeway Talent. 1. Strange body. Can transform into a strange body. Can only be harmed by supernatural forces. 2. Belief of the evil gods. The more people know of your existence, the stronger your power becomes. 3. Grant abilities. Spend reputation points to grant abilities to other beings, control their life and death, and call upon those abilities at will. 4. Unlocked. Unlocked when reputation reaches 100. Current reputation value, 1086. Grant power? Levi raised an eyebrow, closed his eyes, and studied the new talent. When he opened them again, his expression was a mix of surprise and calculation. It looks like there aren't strict limits on what kinds of abilities I can create, he said aloud. I can invent them freely. I can even grant abilities I don't have to others. But stronger abilities cost more reputation. With only 10,000 points, I can't give out anything too powerful. He didn't rush. Levi ran simulations in his head, trying to estimate costs. Then he noticed something important. The system devalued abilities that carried heavier downsides or stricter conditions. The harsher the side effects, or the higher the personal cost, the less reputation the ability consumed. Abilities with extremely low success rates, or those that required special circumstances, were rated lower by the system. That's useful, he muttered. If I deliberately add constraints, or make an ability risky, I can make powerful effects cheap. With a plan, Levi sketched several cost-effective abilities in his mind. He was eager to test them, but needed a guinea pig. He thought for a moment, then frowned as a darker idea formed. Molten Mental Hospital, on the eastern edge of New York, was a place people called a one-way road to hell. Thousands of patients were detained behind a strict prison-like regime. Escapes were unheard of. At the heart of the facility, rows of small rooms were laid out like a honeycomb. In one of them, a woman lay strapped upright to a vertical bed, her mouth muzzled. Her eyes drifted empty, alive but hollow. A figure in a black cloak slipped into the corner of the room. Even his face was hidden by shadow, but a pair of scarlet eyes gleamed from the darkness. The woman's vacant gaze barely moved until the cloaked man stepped forward and produced a small, burning sphere of flame from his arms. "Ah!" he said softly. "Want me to pass you the fire?" At the sight of the flames, the woman's eyes suddenly widened. Hope, something like joy, flickered across her deadened face. She strained against her straps, making the bed creak. The cloaked man smiled and held the flame out to her. "Then burn well." A moment later, the lights in the hallway went out. Over the intercom, a supervisor's voice crackled. "There's a problem with room 115. Go check it out." 1015? Isn't that the woman who's always talking about killing herself? What's up with her? Just said the lights went. Go fix it. Two attendants arrived, noticed the room plunged in darkness, and unlocked the door. Their flashlights played across the walls, but the switch did nothing. The beams finally fell on the woman strapped to the board. "Hey, wake up!" She didn't move. One attendant leaned in and put a finger under her nose. No breath. "She's cold, no breath." Is she faking? Why would she fake it? He reached up and lifted her eyelids. The instant he touched her, his body jolted. The second attendant, indifferent, kept muttering, "Good, she should have died ages ago. I bet Charlie a month ago she wouldn't make it. Beat me, didn't I?" While he fussed with the buckles, the first attendant suddenly turned pale and his flashlight slipped from his hand. The beam rolled across the floor and stopped on a face, smiling, white and wild, behind the glass. A voice echoed from the darkness, manic and amused. "Ha! Pass the fire! Fun! Ha!" A series of thuds followed. A figure dripping with blood staggered out into the room, leaving smeared footprints behind. He tipped his head and grinned at the watching staff. "You guys want to pass on the fire too?" "Don't move. Hands on your head." The figure laughed. "Heh, forget it if you don't want it." Then, with a sudden, brutal motion, he smashed his head against the wall. A grotesque bloom of crimson splashed across the white tile, instant art in gore. The onlookers froze, their faces pale. Corpses littered the floor. Someone on the security monitors yelled. A small crowd gathered. Speculation rippled through them. Maybe it was stress? Should we call the police? Why bother? They're all dead. No point. A few guards swaggered forward. The first to touch a body shuddered and went rigid. Slowly, he lowered his head, and a twitch formed into the same unnatural smile the murderer had worn. The hospital's corridors filled with shocked murmurs as the horror spread, and somewhere in the dark, a tiny, cruel laugh echoed like a spark. 2 hours later, a black sedan pulled up in front of Morton Mental Hospital. A man in a suit and tie with a receding hairline stepped out, glancing at the line of police cars and ambulances parked by the gate. He kept his expression neutral as he hurried inside, showed his credentials to the officer trying to stop him, and made his way to the portly inspector waiting at the doorway. "Agent Coulson?" the inspector said, surprised. Coulson's face was set. "What's going on in there?" A flicker of fear crossed the inspector's features. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling handkerchief. "You should go see for yourself." They pushed through the hospital doors together. The smell hit Coulson first. Iron and copper, thick in the air. He covered his nose and narrowed his eyes. The place looked like a scene from a nightmare. Blood spattered the floor, smeared the walls, flecked the ceiling in frantic, grotesque patterns. It was not paint. Even with years on the job, Coulson felt a chill run down his spine. "What happened?" he asked. The inspector swallowed hard. "There was a riot. The patients, they turned violent. People tried to flee to the first floor, but the doors were locked. It turned into a slaughter." "Mentally ill people acting violent isn't unheard of," Coulson said, though his tone was skeptical. He had walked into worse, and this felt different. "You're saying the guards went berserk too?" For some reason, everyone sent in to control the situation started acting like those patients, the inspector replied. "Even our best officers turned on us. We had to empty mags and pull out. We sealed the place off." Coulson's expression hardened. Ordinary rage didn't make trained police officers become uncontrollable. Something else was at work. He had learned to trust those instincts. "Anything else?" he asked. "Some of the patients were chanting something over and over, 'Pass the fire.'" "Pass the fire?" Coulson repeated, frowning. The phrase sounded ritualistic, sacrificial. He let his mind run through possibilities. He didn't notice the plainclothes cop by the door, giving him a curious smile and whispering to his partner, "Isn't that Coulson, the mayor of Novice Village? Shield moves fast." Across town, Levi was sprawled on his sofa, sipping an iced drink as he reviewed the morning's results. He had gone to Morton to test the third talent he'd just unlocked, granting a woman the ability to become a ghost, to possess and manipulate others. The ability had strict side effects. Her original body would be lost. Her existence as a possessed spirit would last only a day, and possession required physical contact. For the meager price of 200 reputation points, Levi could gift that power. He estimated he could regain the points in under 24 hours. He hadn't expected the recipient to be so aggressive. The woman had run rampant, ripping apart management staff, inciting patients. What should have been a contained experiment turned into a massacre. Levi watched the news footage on mute. It was chaos, the kind that stuck in his chest. He shrugged and sipped his Coke. Let them go free early, he thought. Maybe it was mercy. He wasn't proud of it. Still, the experiment had given him important information. "First," Levi murmured to himself, "the person who accepts my power links to me. I can sense their vision and state, even decide life or death with a thought." That explained how he knew about S.H.I.E.L.D.'s arrival before the reports reached him. But the link had limits. He couldn't completely control their thoughts or actions, and because he hadn't been physically present, the reputation gain was reduced. The woman's repeated shouts of "pass the fire" were an anomaly he couldn't ignore. He set the glass down. "Tom! Jerry!" he called. Two small figures burst in through the open balcony seconds later, one large for its age, the other small and audacious. Tom was an orange tabby American Shorthair, young, sleek, 3 months old, his round face dominated by bright, eager eyes. Jerry was a gray-blue chinchilla, improbably upright on his hind legs, chin held high like a tiny mafioso. Jerry didn't look at all intimidated by Tom's predatory stare. Instead, he turned and made a taunting face. Tom sprang. His front paws lifted, swelling grotesquely for a heartbeat into blunt, squashing paddles, like an oversized fly swatter. He slammed down on the chinchilla's position with a thwack. Jerry was faster. He shook once and multiplied. Dozens of identical little chinchillas scattered in an instant. Tom's swat landed on a clone that vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving a single hair drifting down. Undeterred, Tom launched into a furious chase. He sprinted after the copies, flipping and parkouring through the hall, batting at each one until only fur and a scattering of dust remained. Then he froze and looked up at Levi. Perched on Levi's shoulder, grinning with untouchable smugness, the original Jerry raised his chin. The look said plainly, "You fell for that." Tom's expression melted into adoration. He padded over to Levi with the sleek, flattering gait cats use on people who give them treats, rubbing himself against Levi's legs with a soft, complaining mew. Levi laughed and ruffled his head. "Okay, Tom," he said. "You lose again. Maybe learn a thing or two from Jerry. Be braver. Be clever." "Meow," Tom answered. a thin line of cold amusement in his eyes as they flicked toward the complacent chinchilla. Jerry ignored him, still chuffed at his own trick. Levi watched the two of them and thought about the experiment a little more analytically. The third talent hadn't specified that the recipient had to be human. He'd picked up the animals from a pet store, and sure enough, animals could accept the gift. Tom had been given a transformation power. The drawback was that he fell into a deep sleep after using it. Jerry could create multiple clones, but each clone collapsed when hit. Both were effective in their way and cheap in reputation. Most importantly, Levi could borrow those abilities when he needed them. His body, odd, unnatural, let him bypass the flaws that came with each talent. That made them useful tools, however cruel the morning's unintended consequences might have been. He took another sip and turned his attention back to the feed. Shield was on the scene. "Pass the fire," she had chanted. What that meant would have to wait. For now, there were other experiments to run, other pieces to move. Tom rubbed against his hand expectantly. Jerry hopped up on his knee, still smug. Levi smiled, cold and calculating, and began planning his next step. Chapter 5, Clone. In the apartment, the tabby American short-hair Tom opened his mouth, yawned, curled up at Levi's feet, and was asleep in less than 2 seconds. "Being young is great. Just fall asleep," Levi murmured. He glanced at Jerry, who was yawning on his shoulder. "You should go to bed too," he whispered. Jerry nodded obediently, stretched a little paw, and dove into Tom's soft fur, using the cat's hair as both mattress and blanket. He'd already used his ability several times that day and was soon snoring. Levi watched them both, and the smile on his face slowly faded. He hadn't given Tom and Jerry those powers just for fun. The choices were strategic, tied to how he would earn reputation points later. He reminded himself his third talent wasn't simply gifted, it was borrowed. Levi closed his eyes. In his mind, 3 strange spots of light blinked into being. One was dimmer than the others. A sign, he knew, that the first person who had received his power was about to die. The other 2 lights corresponded to Tom and Jerry. He reached out with that mental link and grasped the 2 bright spots. His body trembled. When he opened his eyes, surprise flooded his face. He clenched a fist, felt the power, and a smile broke across his lips. He plucked a single hair and blew on it. The strand of hair spun in the air and, impossibly, became another Levi. The 2 of them looked at one another and grinned. He wanted to test the limits of his clone technique. He concentrated and made another clone, and another. One by one, the duplicates took shape until he felt his control starting to strain. 5 levies stood before him. He breathed out, puzzled and a little pleased. 5 was the limit for now. He was only borrowing abilities from Tom and Jerry, and the upper bound of what he could generate depended on them, not on him. That was more than enough. With a thought, the clones all shifted, their bodies altered into strange, semi-ethereal forms that flew through the room, passing through furniture as if it weren't there. Immunity to physical attacks came with the transformation, meaning these clones could survive a long time. The experiment wasn't finished yet. They stopped, shook themselves, and their appearances transformed again, dramatically. One had thick eyebrows and big eyes, clad in blue tights with red undergarments and a crimson cape fluttering behind him. Another wore a black battlesuit and scowled. A third was in red tights with an honest, open face. The fourth was tall and disheveled, brandishing a trident as if ready to command the sea. The last was a heroic woman in armor, a sword in her hand, and a determined look that spoke of protecting the world. Levi admired the 5 striking figures and felt a thrill. With cloning and transformation, bolstered by borrowed powers, he suddenly had an army of capable helpers. His true body would be harder to trace, and his capacity for mischief and influence had increased considerably. Reputation points, he thought, would start to climb. 2 clones handle the big jobs, he mused. The other 3 can play tricks and feed the rumor mill. Slit-mouthed women, cat-faced old ladies, red-clothed ghosts, all staged to help that old American purify his soul. Once a strange story took hold, it tended to mutate and amplify on its own, and the reputation yield could be significant. It just took time to settle. But Levi wanted something faster, something dramatic. If you want fame quickly, you ride the current, he said to himself with a curling smile. Who's the most talked about person in the Marvel world right now? That's the ticket. He had one last experiment to run before he put his plan into motion. Damn it! What the hell is going on? New York Police Department Commissioner George Stacy barked, clad in a thick bulletproof vest and standing behind an explosion-proof shield. He stared at the scene before him in stunned, angry disbelief. More than a dozen people stood linked together in a human wall, faces he recognized all too well, old veterans, fresh-faced rookies, even desk clerks. They had been gathered as shields by the man in their midst, Zhu. Zhu smiled and laughed like a madman, not the tough, competent officer Stacy had expected. No, Zhu said merrily. I won't let go. I want to play a game with them. A chill ran through Stacy. Then, without warning, Zhu raised a gun and shot one of the hostages in the head. Blood sprayed across the faces and uniforms of the people beside him. There was no reaction from them. Their eyes were dull and unseeing. Stacy's jaw tightened. He leveled his pistol and spoke into the intercom. What are you waiting for? Take the shot! Outside, a sniper didn't hesitate. The bullet ripped through the air, shattered the glass, and punched a crater-sized hole in Zhu's skull. Zhu collapsed, and the human wall fell in a domino cascade. Stacy exhaled sharply and was about to order his team in to secure the fallen when one of the downed hostages suddenly grabbed Zhu's gun and fired. A single gunshot was followed immediately by several more. Chaos erupted. Stacy shut his eyes for a moment, already knowing. Whatever control had been placed on those people, they were beyond saving. If he didn't act correctly, anyone who moved the wrong way could die. Someone nearby, voice trembling, yelled through the noise, I'm sorry, that man was Nico. I couldn't stop him. I was trying to protect you. The apology dissolved into the gunfire and shouts. Stacy forced himself to focus. Send 2 officers in. See if anyone's alive. Be careful. Yes, came the reply then. Wait. A sudden presence pushed through the scene. Phil Coulson, badge out and calm in a way that grated. He stepped forward and stopped the officers from moving in. Director Stacy, he said, showing his S-Shield ID, we're in charge of this site now. This is the New York Police Department, Stacy snapped, fury and wounded pride in his voice. I am the commissioner of the NYPD. You want us to leave? Where are we supposed to go? Coulson's expression stayed professional, almost sympathetic. I understand, sir, but the precinct is compromised, structurally and operationally. The federal government is placing it under S-Shield oversight until it's secure. It would be best for you and your people to relocate to temporary headquarters. You won't refuse that, Commissioner, will you? Stacy looked at the battered station around him, the broken glass, the blood-streaked floor, cops and hostages alike stunned into silence. He sighed heavily and nodded. Fine, move the precinct to a new building. Make it quick. Coulson gave a brief, approving nod. Around them, agents and officers began the grim work of securing the scene and tending to the living and the dead. End of chapter. Chapter 6. S-Yield. At the police station, Chief Stacy forced a smile and kept up a polite conversation despite the tightness in her chest. She had lost several good officers in this case and couldn't help but try to offer help. Agent Coulson, may I stay and assist with the investigation? You know, some of my best people were sacrificed in this. I can't just walk away. I know how you feel, Chief, Coulson said, returning the smile, but his tone was careful. This is a classified mission, though. I'm sorry, I can't have you in on the details. You also know how sensitive this looks to the people above us. Please don't make it harder. Stacy hesitated, then nodded. All right, if you need anything, you let me know. Actually, I do need your help, Coulson replied. Seal off the station, keep civilians out, and bring us flamethrowers. Stacy's forced smile faltered. Coulson saw it and softened his voice. Chief, believe me, this isn't a normal case. There are phenomena that can't be explained by science. To avoid more casualties, this is best handled by people trained for the extraordinary. Trust us. The weight of the incident finally showed on Stacy. The air had felt wrong since the first call, an omnipresent, chill unease. She swallowed and gave an order. Men moved to seal the station. Soon, S-Shield backup arrived, and Coulson briefed them bluntly. The situation at the police station is very similar to what we saw at the psychiatric hospital this morning. I have reason to believe it's the same perpetrator and that it's hiding among the corpses. In a corpse? One agent asked, horrified. Yes. From the hospital footage, anyone who touches the body becomes like the corpse. You can't touch it. The only safe way is incineration. The agents readied flamethrowers supplied by the police. Out in an apartment several blocks away, Levi watched remotely through a feed. He'd been following the experiment all along. Seeing S-Shield arrive and arm themselves signaled the end was near. As expected, he thought. They found a solution. Burn everything. He pressed his palm to his temple and took hold of the small, dim flame he'd been tending in his mind. He squeezed it until it splintered. Immediately, he felt the distant power he'd meddled with begin to strain and riot, a force he'd set loose now, losing containment and turning into destruction. He smiled. Controlling people's lives like this, making them instruments of an experiment, had its cruel logic. He had protections of his own. The force wouldn't turn on him. Time to rock the Marvel world a little, he murmured. Back at the station, the S-Shield agents edged to within 2 or 3 meters of the piled bodies. One man opened up with his flamethrower. A jet of roaring heat struck the corpse. Within seconds, the flesh took fire, thick smoke billowing up and twisting into a spectral figure. A woman formed from the smoke, hovering above the charred remains. She spread her hands as if to embrace the flames and smiled. Her laughter seemed to be there, but no sound came through the smoke to the agent's ears. The sight made even these seasoned operatives uneasy. They could shoot terrorists. How do you confront something that lived in death? "Boss, come look," someone shouted. "I've got it," Coulson answered. He'd seen the phantom almost at once. He strode forward, took the flamethrower from an agent with a curt motion, and barked, "Keep the angle. Don't stop." They poured more fire on the corpses. The bodies blackened and smoked, giving off a nauseating stench. Coulson kept his gaze fixed on the ghost in the air. For a moment, its expression twisted between agony and ecstasy. Then it slowly dissipated into nothing. Coulson exhaled and ordered, "Okay, stop." "Was it destroyed?" an agent asked. "Probably." Another added, "If it burns, it's nothing to worry about." "Good work," someone else said. "Thanks to the boss. If you'd been late, who knows?" "Enough joking." Coulson cut them off, serious again. "Stay on site. If anything moves, burn it." "Yes, sir." After the scene was secured, Coulson took the footage and the hospital list back to his car. He cross-checked names and videos until he had a lead. The woman in the footage matched a patient at the psychiatric hospital, Brenda Dickens. On the tablet screen, her face was pale and ordinary, eyes rimmed with fatigue. She didn't look like someone who could start an outbreak of homicidal possession. "She's a patient," Coulson muttered. "That means this isn't over." It was evening by the time he returned to S-Shield headquarters. He went straight to the director's office, to the man whose name alone put the room on alert, Nick Fury. Tall, dark, with the black eye patch he'd worn for years, Fury looked up when Coulson entered. "I heard 17 police officers died. What the hell happened?" "It appears to be a supernatural phenomenon," Coulson said, and handed Fury the tablet. "The woman's name is Brenda Dickens. She was a psychiatric patient with severe mental illness and a tendency towards self-harm." Fury frowned at the photograph. "She doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary." "No, not until last night. The surveillance shows that the first person to touch her corpse went insane, killed someone, then herself. She spread like an infection. One person after another turned into killers." "So," Fury said coldly, "this woman died, came back as something else, and started inhabiting bodies. That's what killed 17 officers?" Coulson nodded. "I saw the ghost." Fury was quiet for a beat, thinking. "There have been a lot of weird things in New York lately," he said finally. "The man in the mirror, people seeing themselves act differently in reflections," Coulson confirmed. "And the Headless Horseman reports, a decapitated figure on a bike at night." Fury's jaw tightened. "I don't like this. Feels a lot like things we saw more than 20 years ago." A sharp ring cut through the tension. Fury snatched up the phone, annoyance written across his face. "Fury," he said. The expression on his face changed instantly. He slammed the handset down so hard the desk rattled, then banged his fist on the table. "God damn it! Tony Stark is missing!" Chapter 7. Tony Stark, half an hour earlier. Manhattan at night glittered like always, an endless sea of lights. In one of the city's grand townhouses, the party was louder than most. Music thumped, wine flowed, and a swarm of models and wealthy men danced close and careless. Tony Stark, the world's most notorious bachelor, was at the center of it all, leaning back and flirting with two young models in skimpy bikinis. Before the song could end, he'd had enough of idle talk. "I don't want to waste time," he said with a rakish smile, pulling them in closer. They gulped, giggled, and clung to him. "You're so bad," one breathed. "You'll see how good I am," Tony answered, and, lantern-jawed and intoxicated, tried to lead them down a corridor. After a few false starts and coy refusals, he managed to tumble into a bedroom with them and collapse on the bed. "Excuse me, ladies, I'm a little hot. Could you help me out of my clothes?" he joked. "We need to shower first," one of them insisted. "Why bother? You can shower later." "It's different," she insisted, and slipped into the bathroom with the other girl. Tony watched them go with a grin. He started to strip, planning to splash himself with cold water to sober up, and then everything went black. A wave of dizziness hit him. "Did I drink spiked wine?" was his last coherent thought before he passed out. When he woke up, the ceiling above him was unfamiliar. His vision swam as he sat up. The air smelled of metal and stale cold. He realized quickly something was very wrong. His ankle was chained to a metal plate bolted to the wall. He yanked at it, hard, but the chain didn't budge. He scanned the small, windowless room. It was sparse, about 16 by 13 feet, with a 10-foot ceiling, too cramped to be a living space, and too clean to be accidental. There was a cheap television mounted on the opposite wall and a conspicuous camera above it. His pockets were empty. His phone, wallet, and whatever else he'd had at the party were gone. "Oh, how considerate," Tony muttered. Someone was very thorough. After a few fruitless tugs, he shouted toward the door. "Hey, is anyone there? Very funny, guys. This isn't a prank. When I get out of here, I'm firing every security guard who let this happen." No answer came. Nausea from the alcohol rolled through him. He rubbed his temples and tried to remember the last thing he'd seen. He and the girls. The drink. The blackness. He put the pieces together and scowled. "Lovely. Kidnapped. Well, it'll take more than a cheap chain to keep me." He sat back on the cold floor and studied the room. The chain only let him move into the corner. He couldn't reach the door or the TV. The camera watched him like a pair of unblinking eyes. A rustle cut the silence. The TV clicked on of its own accord. A grainy image filled the screen, a dim corridor, and then a puppet riding a squeaky little tricycle rolled into view. It wore a tiny black suit. Its skin was waxy pale, its lips and eyes stained an obscene scarlet, and spiral marks were painted on both cheeks. The camera zoomed in until the doll's face filled the screen. When it opened its mouth to speak, the sound was a scraping, childish cackle that made Tony's teeth grit. "Hello, Tony Stark," the doll said. "My name is Billy. I want to play a game." For a second, Tony just stared. And then, of course, he laughed. Loud, incredulous, dismissive. "You, a creepy doll named Billy, kidnapped me? Nice toy. Whoever bought that has terrible taste. No kid would want this thing." A high, grating laugh answered him. Tony felt his irritation spike. "Tony Stark, you're as sarcastic as they say," the doll said in a voice like nails on a chalkboard. "So you drug me, drag me to a tiny room, and then complain about my personality? Real classy." Tony rose and tested the chain again, pacing as much as he could. "You want money, right?" he offered. "Say the word. 10 million? 50? I'll sign whatever. Let me go and I won't make a stink." Billy was unmoved. "Tony Stark, do you believe money buys everything?" Tony stifled a smirk. "Don't go all moral on me. I've heard the lecture. Money can't buy love. Money can't buy." "You parade as a playboy," the doll interrupted, its voice turning flat. "Beautiful women at your side every night. But have you ever been loved? You control one of the largest arms manufacturers in the world. You sell weapons across the globe and they kill. Do you feel nothing? Is there no guilt? No trace of love left in your heart?" For the first time that night, Tony's humor slid. He opened his mouth to reply, to say it was business, to deflect, to charm. But Billy didn't give him a chance. "I want to play a game," the doll said again. Its small hands produced a remote. A click, and the TV split into 3 panels. Each panel showed a person tied up. Tony recognized the positions. Each figure was tightly bound, gagged, struggling. The camera on the room couldn't lie. The images were real, and his stomach dropped. Tony's face hardened. "Who are they? What do you want?" "Didn't I tell you?" Billy's voice was almost conversational. I want to play a game with you. Chapter 8. I want to play a game. Tony drew a deep breath in the cramped room, his eyes flicking to the three faces on the TV screen. His expression shifted from grim to stunned. The first was a pot-bellied, bald old man, Obadiah Stane, a longtime friend of Howard Stark, a shareholder in Stark Industries, and someone who had been part mentor, part ally to Tony. The second was the familiar blonde profile of Pepper Potts, his assistant and the one person he trusted most. And the third image made his blood run cold. "You tied up an Air Force colonel? Are you insane?" he barked. James Rhodey Rhodes, a colonel in the U.S. Air Force and Tony's college friend, was strapped down in the video feed. Tony and Rhodey were close, closer than most knew. The sight of him bound and helpless hit Tony harder than anything else on the screen. His heart hammered and a headache flared. This wasn't a petty kidnapper looking for a payday. This was someone who liked to play games. He swallowed down his contempt and forced himself to be practical. He couldn't gamble with any of their lives. "Okay," he gritted out. "You win. What game do you want me to play? I'll play it." A gaudy, puppet-like face, Billy, popped up on the screen, its red eyes blinking slowly. "Tony, it seems you still have a trace of conscience. That's good." The puppet smiled. "With your intelligence, this game should be easy for you. I have faith in you. Don't let me down." Tony's mind raced. Faith from a kidnapper with a puppet on screen. There had to be accomplices. How else would Rhodes and his men have been captured so easily? If there were others involved, could Tony save everyone by himself? Panic tried to creep in, but he kept his voice level. "Cut the crap and get on with it. I have a date tomorrow morning." "You look energetic," Billy said in a sing-song voice. "I hope you can keep it up." He laughed, produced a remote, and pressed a button. "Then the prize for level 1. Miss Pepper Potts." The screen snapped to a close-up of Pepper. Her makeup-free face showed dark circles and genuine panic. Tony felt a stab of guilt. He'd left too much on her shoulders. More worrying, a chainsaw was slowly moving toward her, its teeth glinting. A countdown, real or implied, began to hang in the air. "You actually took away her right to put on makeup and showed her like this," Tony muttered, half to himself. Billy announced the rules. "For level 1, you must get out of that room and get to the next one to save Miss Potts. If you don't, the chainsaw will cut her in half. You have 30 minutes. And Tony, don't trust your eyes too much. Enjoy the game." 30 minutes? Tony's voice cracked. He slammed a fist into the wall. "You locked me in here. If I could get out, I would have already." "Don't trust your eyes," the puppet had said. Tony took it as a clue, not a taunt. He tested the restraints on his ankles, flexed his feet, and stretched the chain to map his possible range of motion. There was no visible exit, no hidden seam, no obvious key. The room looked ordinary, too ordinary. He closed his eyes and began to feel along the walls inch by inch. For a long time, there was nothing but drywall and dust. Just as he was about to give up, his hand slid into something soft and then, startlingly, his palm seemed to sink into the wall, as if the surface had given way beneath his fingers. His rational brain rebelled at the impossible feeling, but he kept his hand steady and probed deeper until his fingers brushed metal. He pulled his hand out and stared at the object, a rusty iron saw. Tony's first thought was practical and bitter. "Are you kidding me? You expect me to saw through the chain with this thing?" He had always been good with tools. As a kid, he'd taken his father's sports car apart just to see how it worked. He quickly did the math. Even with the saw, by the time he cut the chainsaw in the other room would have long finished its job. The rusty saw felt less like a solution and more like a taunt, something meant to waste time. If Billy wanted to mess with him, a distraction would do it. He continued feeling along the wall with his eyes shut, hunting for anything else. 10 minutes passed, then 20. He sat on the floor, the saw heavy in his hand, and went over the possibilities again. There was no other tool, no key, no hidden panel, nothing. Tony thought of the brutal alternative and felt sick. Compared to steel, human bone was far weaker. If he were ruthless enough, he could saw off a leg in a matter of minutes and free himself. But could he actually do it? Could he sacrifice his own limb to save Pepper? He looked back at Pepper on the screen, only centimeters away from the encroaching blade, her face collapsing with despair. He wanted to laugh at the cruelty, to smash the TV, to find the cowardly puppet and tear him apart. Instead, he pressed the saw into his palm and felt the weight of choice. "Billy," he shouted at the camera, fury shaking his voice. "I'm Tony Stark. You hear me? I'm Tony Stark. You coward. If you've got guts, come out and fight me. I'll make you regret this." It was partly bravado, partly a plea. When the screen stayed silent, he shouted a few more curses and then ran out of steam. He lay back on the cold floor and stared at the ceiling, hollow-eyed. The room felt smaller than before. He whispered, more to himself than to anyone else, "I'm sorry, Pepper. It's not that I don't want to save you, I just don't know if I can." A quiet settled in the room. Then Tony blinked and something snagged his attention. "Huh?" Chapter 9. The game continues. When Tony Stark disappeared, a ripple of alarm spread through every agency that kept the peace or profited from keeping it. As the head of the world's largest private arms manufacturer, his safety wasn't just a personal matter, it was a national one. The police, the FBI, the CIA all mobilized. S.H.I.E.L.D. couldn't afford to be left behind. Howard Stark had helped found the organization, and Nick Fury had been quietly watching Tony for years, trying to judge whether the Playboy genius could ever step up to the legacy his father left behind. Tony's lifestyle had kept the judgment in limbo and in Fury's hands. "Tony Stark is missing," Fury told Agent Coulson, his face grim as he listened to the informant's briefing. "Missing?" Coulson echoed. "Not just Tony," Fury said. "His assistant, an important shareholder in Stark Industries, and a colonel who's close to him, gone." "Who would do this? A foreign power?" Coulson asked. "Foreign actors have been quiet for a while," Fury said. "They don't suddenly take out an arms dealer, even a billionaire. The strange thing is, our network is blind. It's like they evaporated." Coulson's eyes narrowed. "You mean?" Fury walked to the window, peering through the blinds into the night. "This feels like the opening move," he said. "Something is surfacing out of the dark. I can feel it. There's a badness in the air. Coulson, find Tony Stark." "We will," Coulson promised. Meanwhile, in one of the rooms the kidnapper had prepared, Pepper Potts lay bound and immobilized. She had been finishing up at the office and going to bed when a blow had taken her out cold. When she came to, she found herself tightly shackled and a screaming electric saw spinning a few inches from her face. Fear made her dizzy. She tried to remember what she had done to deserve this, then realized she hadn't even had the chance to put on makeup. An absurd thought, but it made her cry harder. The door slammed open. Pepper's heart leapt. A figure lunged in and silenced the chainsaw before the blade could bite. "Tony," she whispered, disbelief and relief mingling in her voice. "It's me. Stop crying. You'll mess up your face," he snapped, breathless, then immediately collapsed to the floor with a long, exhausted exhale. Pepper stared at him through tears. "You saved me," she managed. "Thank you." Tony waved her off without meeting her eyes. "Do me a favor and work harder in the future." If you knew Tony, you would have known he'd almost given up the rescue. But while he lay on his back on the floor, something caught his attention: the ceiling. He pried a small piece off with the metal saw's blade, and a key clinked down to the carpet. He fumbled it up, unlocked Pepper's chains, and helped her to her feet. "You were kidnapped?" Pepper asked as soon as she could speak. "Yep," Tony said simply. "Same as you." "Do you know who did this?" "I only know he's a bad guy." "Then call the police." "If I could have called the police, I would have," Tony said, already scanning the room. He tried to rattle loose the artistic coils of chain that had wrapped Pepper like some warped sculpture, but without the key his efforts only made her more uncomfortable. He let go with an embarrassed, "Sorry, can't pick it without the key. I was chained up just like you." A familiar, infuriatingly smug voice cut through the room from a speaker overhead. "Wow, Tony Stark. High IQ and a fighting spirit. Congratulations, you passed the first level of the game. When you picked up that iron saw, I almost believed you were a real man." Tony flipped a finger at the camera. "Shut up," he growled. "I've seen enough of you." "You've seen through me?" The voice purred. "How arrogant. If you think you can leave without finishing the game, forget it," the voice continued. "You go to the next room. Don't even think about escaping." The taunt ended as the line went dead. Pepper's practical side returned as soon as the immediate threat passed. "You have to keep going," she said. "He brought Obadiah and Rhodey here too. Tony didn't try to hide it. I know. I saw them after I woke up." Go. Save them, Pepper urged. I will, Tony said. He picked up the disassembled chainsaw and tossed it aside, just in case. After one more check to make sure Pepper was secure and breathing, he headed for the door. The corridor outside was pitch black, except for a single patch of red light ahead. Tony took 2 steps and realized the passage he'd come from was gone. No door, no hallway, just a blind wall where he'd entered. Is that a trick? He muttered. He found the wall and followed it by touch toward the red light, letting his hands guide his steps. He relied on the same improvisation that had gotten him out of worse jams before, thinking fast, feeling his way forward, and trusting his instincts. Whatever game they were playing, Tony thought, he could play it better. He squared his shoulders and moved toward the light. The game wasn't over yet. Chapter 10. Tony's Death? In the dark, Tony groped forward until his hand brushed something that glowed faintly red. Up close, it wasn't a light bulb at all, but an indicator embedded in a doorframe, casting a hazy red across the wall. Some English words were stamped on it. Under the glow, Tony squinted and murmured, "Fire exit? Emergency exit?" A chill ran down his spine. His fingers loosened from the handle. That bastard said there was no door, and now there's a door right in front of me. If this isn't a trap, I won't touch a woman for a month. He forced a smirk and kept feeling along the wall. Sure enough, his fingers found a doorknob, even though to his eyes the wall elsewhere looked ordinary. You only know how to play tricks, don't you? You said I'd buy it, but you clearly don't believe me, Tony muttered, smugness growing. He turned the knob carefully, eased a gap open, and peered inside. It was a small room, not much different from the 2 he'd already seen. In the center, his longtime partner, Obadiah Stane, sat chained to a chair, looking pale and tired. Tony didn't hesitate. He pushed the door all the way open and stepped inside. Tony? Obadiah's face brightened the instant he saw him. You finally came to save me. Quick, the key is on the wall to my right. Take it down and unlock the chains. Tony glanced where Obadiah pointed and saw a key hanging on a nail. He frowned. There weren't any obvious death traps, no chainsaws or spinning blades, so he allowed himself a small, relieved smile. Hi, Obadiah. Thank God you're not hurt. I'd be devastated if you were. Obadiah's expression fell back into fear. Save the greetings for after you get me out, Tony. I'm scared. You? Scared? Tony snorted. Weren't you and my father through mountains of trouble together? It's different when you get old, Obadiah said. This was serious. Did you know I'd show up? Tony asked. Yes, Obadiah admitted. There was a voice that told me to stay quiet and wait for you to save me. Tony's suspicion deepened. He looked around the bare room. Besides the chair and Obadiah, the only other notable thing was a small camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. Tony didn't trust easy answers. He didn't believe the bastard would let him have the real key without some trick. But he couldn't see any mechanism or trap. Under Obadiah's urgent urging, Tony stepped up to the key. It felt cold in his hand, and for a fraction of a second he wondered if it was a decoy. Still, he took it and held it up to Obadiah. Don't get your hopes too high. I don't think this necessarily opens your chains. Obadiah nodded frantically. But we have to try, right? Fine. Tony slid the key into the lock. It fit. He turned it. With a satisfying click, the padlock on Obadiah's chains popped open. Then yellow-green gas whooshed out from every crack and corner of the room. Tony's heart sank. Damn it, of course. That's poison gas. Tony, quick, get the chains off. Obadiah shouted. The gas expanded instantly, thickening the air. Hold your breath, Tony barked. Gritting his teeth, he and Obadiah worked feverishly to loosen the shackles. Those seconds stretched into an eternity. Tony's eyes stung, his lungs burned as he fought to keep his breath held. They had just finished when, without warning, Obadiah swung hard. Tony didn't see it coming. A brutal punch cracked into his cheek and sent him sprawling. Sorry, Tony, Obadiah said coldly without regret. I just want to live. Then he turned and staggered away into the choking fog. Tony lay stunned, the betrayal like a hot iron in his chest. His ears rang, his vision blurred. He tried to rise, but the punch had floored him. Through watering eyes, he watched Obadiah's retreating back dissolve into the haze. A harsh, triumphant voice cut through the room. Tony, Billy taunted from an unseen speaker, you pride yourself on seeing through people, but you can never fully read a human heart. You couldn't see this game. You lost. lost to your arrogance and to how complicated people are. Are you ready to die? Tony couldn't answer. The blow had forced him to inhale the poison. The gas invaded through his nose and mouth and flowed into his lungs like molten fire. It felt like his throat was aflame. He coughed and hacked until his ribs ached. He wanted to crawl after Obadiah, to drag him back, to chase down Billy, to do anything, but every movement felt as slow as trying to lift himself out of a grave. A few steps away became an impossible chasm. Finally, his legs failed. He collapsed. He raised his right hand weakly once as if to reach for something, then let it drop. Am I going to die? Images from his life flashed behind his closed eyelids. The first time he saw his father, arguments, triumphs, failures. His last clear thought was of his father. Father, I have to go find you. It's not fair. I haven't done enough. I wanted you to be proud, wanted to hear, son, you're great. Anger and regret mingled as his consciousness thinned. The world around him faded into muffled sounds. Before everything went dark, two voices drifted into his mind, distant and clinical. Lord Shin, you've crossed the line. I was here first. Give me Tony Stark. He has the potential to be a successor. Can he become a torch? That's right. Darkness will come, and this world needs more flames to burn and pass on. Passing on the flame is our honor. Chapter 11 doesn't seem to be dead. Of course, Tony wasn't actually dead. Levi still needed him to rack up a lot more reputation points. There was no way he would let him die at the start. The poison gas had been nothing but an illusion created with mental power. Reputation, 18,788 Todd. Levi watched his reputation skyrocket by thousands in a few hours and felt like hugging the patient heap of Tony Stark on the floor and smothering him with kisses. In Levi's eyes, Tony wasn't Iron Man so much as a woolly sheep, ripe for the plucking. After a brief double act with his clone, Levi knelt beside Tony, tipped up his chin, and mused aloud, "What ability should I give him?" He'd tuned the Salary King's settings to maximize reputation gain and pulled Tony into the trap on purpose. Capable or not, interesting cells. After a moment, Levi made his decision. He smiled, snapped his fingers, conjured a small ball of light, and sent it into Tony. As the light sank into him, the painful expression on Tony's face relaxed. Satisfied, Levi chuckled, slipped into the shadows, and disappeared. "Tony Stark," he murmured, "do your part and act the role. Don't disappoint me." Tony's eyelids fluttered open. The ache he'd felt before blacking out still lingered, but it faded with every breath. He blinked, groped over his body, and, bewildered, sat up. I'm not dead? Not only was he alive, the bruises and the throat burn from the poison were gone. He felt better than he had in months, almost like he'd been 20 again and hadn't started living carelessly. What the hell, was that all an illusion? He stood and scanned the room. No trace of gas, no lingering threat. His mind buzzed with a dozen half-formed thoughts. Someone called the Fire King had saved him and said he had potential to become the Fire King? Passing on the fire, what did that mean? He also remembered a strange dream. Being abducted, building an iron suit out of necessity, becoming Iron Man. It had felt real and unreal at once. The more he thought, the more his head hurt, so he stopped and focused on one thing he could act on: escape. Rhodes and Pepper were still out there. They were people he had to get to. Obadiah had betrayed him. Tony clenched his jaw at the thought. He'd pay him back. He glanced once at the camera in the corner and then left the room. The corridor outside was normal again, no oppressive darkness. He quickly found the doors where he and Pepper had been held. They were on the same hall. So Rhodes is in the last room, Tony muttered. He decided to check on him first. Rhodes was a colonel. If anyone had a plan, it would be him. Standing at the final door, Tony felt an odd flutter of nerves. He pushed it open, and the sight made his blood run cold. Colonel Rhodes was hanging in the room, bound like a crucifix, head bowed, his uniform torn and soaked with blood. He'd obviously been savaged. Heat rushed to Tony's face and his eyes went red. If not for the TV in the corner showing the wooden, grinning face of the puppet Billy, he would have charged across the floor. He was just out of a life-and-death crisis and didn't want to fall into another trap, so he planted his feet as if welded there. From somewhere down the dim corridor came a childlike laugh and the squeak of tiny wheels. Billy rode his tricycle into view, twirling his wooden finger as he watched Tony with delighted curiosity. Surprised? he called. "You didn't expect me to wait here for you?" Tony forced himself to take in the scene and control his voice. "I didn't expect the Fire King to let you live. A mere ordinary salary king trying to kill me?" Billy scoffed. "What a joke." He bobbed his head in a grotesque little dance. "You're lucky, Tony Stark. You getting brought back to life like this is practically a gift. I'll give you one more chance. One last game." Tony's mind cataloged the strange titles. Fire King, Salary King, Cinderella King. Was there more than one of these rulers? He filed that odd detail away and pointed at Rhodes, voice hard. "Fine, I'll play. If I win, you let him go. Alive." Billy grinned. "Of course." He hopped off his tricycle and leaned forward, puppeteer smile wide. "Mr. Rod was a naughty boy, tried to ruin the fun between you and me, so he got himself a little punishment. Don't worry, he's not dead. If you win, I'll release him." A surge of relief hit Tony. He breathed a little easier and asked, "What's the game?" "The rules are very simple." Billy tilted his head as if trying to peek out of the TV and wiggled a finger toward Rhodes. "Find a piece of paper from Colonel Rhodes, face the camera, and read aloud what's written on it." Tony frowned, not because the task seemed difficult, but because it seemed too easy. Simple rules usually meant traps. He'd risked 1,000,000,000 yuan already. He wasn't about to be fooled by a straight line. "That's it! That's it!" Billy clapped. "Come on, Tony. Hurry over to Rod's place." Tony's guard went up. "Do that, and you'll free Rhodes?" "Not just Rhodes," Billy said, spreading his wooden hands. "You two and Miss Pepper. Everyone will walk out of here and begin new lives." "Oh, and Mr. Obadiah? He completed his game and got out. Quite the performance. The only pity is the betrayed hero survived." "You bastard." Tony swallowed his anger down and kept his voice low. "Sooner or later I'll tear your disgusting little head off and kick it like a ball." Billy waved a hand as if dismissing a fly. "We'll do the game first. Don't spoil the fun with threats." Chapter 12. Social death is also a kind of death. Tony sat in the last room, eyes fixed on the screen where Billy's grinning face filled the monitor. His breath came in ragged pulls, chest heaving. The man on the screen clapped once, amused. "What are you waiting for, Stark? You want to wait until Obadiah brings a squad of cops through the door?" "Ha!" Billy taunted. "You should worry more about poor Rhodes. His wound's still bleeding. If you dilly-dally and something happens, don't say I didn't warn you." Tony glanced at Rhodes and felt a stab of panic. Rhodes looked terrible, his face gray, lips dry, eyes shut. A dark pool had spread beneath him, enough to turn anyone's stomach. There was no time for theatrics. Tony forced himself to breathe, to steady his hands. He tested the floor with a tentative step and then another. Solid, no trap. He swallowed and took measured steps toward Rhodes. Billy's voice on the screen kept jabbering at him. "You think I'd really set a trap for a kid like that? Who do you take me for?" But Tony blocked the taunts and kept moving, each step steadier than the last. When he reached Rhodes, he looked down at his friend. Closed eyes, the hollowed cheeks of someone pale and hurt. Anger burned hot in Tony's chest. So this was what had happened to a man who'd stood by him so many times. Then Rhodes's eyelids fluttered. He cracked one eye and gave Tony a tiny, almost imperceptible blink. Tony felt the corner of his mouth twitch. He barked at Billy without meaning to, trying to hide the relief in his voice. "You son of a—" "Compliments, thanks," Billy said, still amused. "Now hurry up and get that paper." Tony's heart thudded. Billy kept up the pressure. "Check the left trouser pocket." Tony's hand went there out of reflex, and his fingers brushed the small corner of white paper peeking out. Hope flared. Rhodes might be playing along, might be awake and giving him a clue. If Rhodes had been knocked out, how would a scrap of paper have ended up in his pocket? Maybe Rhodes had been given the paper earlier. Maybe he'd caught something. Either way, Rhodes's safety had to be the priority. Face set, Tony pulled the paper out and glanced at it. Blood drained from his face. He held it up like an insult. "You want me to read this?" "No. No way. I absolutely will not read it." Billy's smile on the screen widened. He didn't look surprised. "Is that so?" Outside, dawn was breaking. The sun carved the dark away, and the city's night shifted into day. The gangsters' carnival was over. This was the hour when ordinary people went back to ordinary lives. Sean, an office worker with a 9-to-5, shuffled into the kitchen. His wife's seat was empty but still warm. She'd already gone to the bathroom. He rinsed off the night, sat at the table, sipped his coffee, and grabbed the remote out of habit. Morning news while you eat. It's a staple. Today, the news looked different. On his TV, a man with a scruffy mustache held a piece of paper and spoke in an awkward, reluctant voice. "Hello. I don't need to say much. You all know who I am." "Yes, I'm Tony Stark," the man said, "CEO of Stark Industries, the playboy you call." He faltered for a moment and then soldiered on. "This is a confession letter. It's ridiculous, I know. Fine. Listen, I want to confess." Sean nearly dropped his mug. He waved to the kitchen. "Hey, come out here. You have to see this. I think it's big." At S.H.I.E.L.D., Coulson woke Nick Fury. "Sir, look, Tony's on the feed." Fury rubbed at his eyes and stared at the footage. "Am I hallucinating?" "No," Coulson replied. "We're tracking the source now. Should have an ID soon." Fury leaned back and watched with a mix of irritation and fascination as Tony read on, strangely candid. "I'm not just a man," Tony said on screen, his voice strangely uneven. "I'm a beast when I get into it. Over the years, I've ruined hundreds of women. No, wait, that sounds worse than it is. Some of it was mutual. Yes, the rumors are true. I had my fun with those 12 calendar girls. I influenced a lot of kids in the wrong ways. I'm sorry." He didn't look contrite so much as embarrassed and oddly proud at the same time. "I thought money could buy everything. I was wrong. I couldn't buy love, and real friendship was rare. I only had one friend who would stand with me, and he's behind me now. I've been a lonely little man." Happy Hogan, Tony's head of security, was standing in a villa kitchen somewhere, chewing a burger and staring at the screen, a hollow feeling in his gut. "Hey, you guys found Tony yet?" He barked at the officers around him. "Look at him. He's already talking crazy on TV." On the screen, Tony went on, voice alternating between contrition and bluster. "I'm still a weapons maker. The advanced arms I've made have countless enemies and cost the lives of soldiers too. That's on me. I should have invented stronger deterrents. I squandered my time on women when I should have been doing better things. That was wrong." He read out a long list of alleged sins, the sort of grand performative litany that would make headlines. Then he paused and made a weird, stiff little apology that seemed meant for one person. "Pepper," he said, voice tighter. "Between a foot and you, I chose my foot. I'm a coward. Coward? I don't ask for your forgiveness. I'm sorry." The broadcast cut. Simultaneously, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s tracking returned to location. "It came from Hell's Kitchen," Coulson reported. Fury's jaw tightened. "Get a team. Go get our baby back." "Yes, sir," Coulson answered. Outside, the city woke properly now. For Tony Stark, the morning had already become a public spectacle. His private life blitzed across every screen. For Rhodes, for Pepper, for the men and women trying to save them, the clock was running down. Chapter 13, Elegance. Tony wanted nothing more than to find a crack in the floor and slide into it. Pride was part of him, always had been, but never had he apologized so humbly to anyone. Even with his own father, he'd argued his case. He still believed he had done nothing wrong. The 10 charges sounded like nonsense. Was it a crime to be handsome, rich, and have a lot of girlfriends? The weapons he'd developed had put America decades ahead. Wasn't he entitled to rest? The thought that made him hottest with shame, though, was that shameless Billy had almost certainly edited his confession and broadcast it to the world. The grin on Billy's face left no doubt. Tony sat on the floor, deflated, all dignity gone. Rhodes watched with a smile that was impossible to wipe away. Tony slumped, feeling as if everything worth protecting in his life had been ripped away, and addressed the television with a hollow sigh. "Happy now? You've destroyed Tony Stark with your own 2 hands." No, Billy said gloatingly from the screen, leaning into the camera. "Your pride isn't that easy to kill, unless you suddenly can't do basic arithmetic." He laughed. "You surprised me, Tony. You win this round. The police and the agents will be here soon. You're done." Relief flooded Tony. The ordeal finally had an end. All he wanted was a long sleep. But Billy's next words tightened the knot in his gut. "Don't think this is over. This is only the beginning. Congratulations, officially welcome to the extraordinary world. It's a gift and a curse." "Extraordinary world? Gift? Curse? What are you talking about?" Tony snapped to the screen. Billy only smiled enigmatically. "You'll find out. Goodbye, Tony. I look forward to our next meeting." The feed went black. Tony, puzzled and annoyed, grabbed the television and shook it. Hey, don't run. Say it clearly. Are you the Riddler from Gotham? Rhodes interrupted with a coughing fit. Cough, cough, Tony. Can you help me bandage this? I think I'm too old for this. Sorry, I'll do it. Tony let go of the TV and turned to Rhodes. As he reached to touch Rhodes's wound, a flash of images flooded him. Rhodes's figure appearing and reappearing in a series of vivid scenes. A stabbing headache followed, and Tony pressed his hands to his temples. What's wrong? Rhodes asked, concerned. Fine, Tony lied, shaking his head. Then, confused, he blurted out, Have you ever given me some extreme award, like an extravagant military prize? The Pinnacle Award. Rhodes sounded surprised. Wait, you know about that? The military's planning to give you an extreme award. There was supposed to be a big ceremony next week. I was going to tell you, but I got attacked as soon as I left base. Images swam in Tony's head. Rhodes, presenting him with an award. The ceremony, the applause. He'd just seen that, as if it had already happened. Had he dreamed his own future? Could he see what would come? The thought was preposterous and thrilling and terrifying all at once. Billy's parting line, a gift and a curse, came back to him like a warning. Across town, Obadiah was running for his life. He was breathless, sweat slicking his beard, the composure he prided himself on sagging with each ragged inhale. Darkness pressed in behind him. All he wanted was to escape. He jogged through the corridor until, with the last of his strength, he shoved open a door and tumbled into sunlight. Laughter burst from him, half hysteria, half triumph. Ha! I made it! He was alive, and if Tony didn't survive whatever gas had been released, Obadiah would inherit Stark Industries, become chairman, the controlling shareholder, everything he'd been scheming for. The thought made him laugh again, louder this time. Then the sound of rotors cut through the air. Familiar sirens followed. Fleet after fleet of police cars screeched to a neat stop in front of him. Officers piled out, weapons trained, and in seconds, Obadiah found himself surrounded. His grin froze. He raised shaking hands and croaked, Ah? Meanwhile, in Hell's Kitchen, Jin Bing sat alone at a long dining table, immaculate in a spotless white suit with a triangular napkin tucked at his collar. He held his fork and knife with slow, ceremonious precision, cutting a slice of steak and letting it melt between his teeth. Eyes closed, he savored the simple pleasure of a well-prepared meal. The villa door slammed open. Men in black suits poured in like a flood. Security guards were pinned to the floor before they could react. Jin Bing's hands tightened on his cutlery. When he opened his eyes, a cold, unhidden menace burned there. Who are you? He asked, voice cool. It's rude to disturb someone's dinner. The man at the front smiled thinly and produced a piece of paper. Jin Bing, we have sufficient evidence linking you to a kidnapping. This is an arrest warrant. Please come with us. Jin Bing blinked. Kidnapping? As an underground kingpin, he took what he wanted and bought what he couldn't. How had anyone traced this to him? He sniffed the air for the slightest sign of a trap, but elegance, he reminded himself, must be maintained. He dabbed his mouth with the napkin and replied, measured and bored, I need to finish my breakfast. The lead man's patience snapped. Several officers lunged, forcing Jin Bing forward and slamming him onto the table. A specially made, thick soup splattered across his pristine suit. Rage flared, the muscles under his jacket tensed. With a single brutal motion, he swept the men off him, sending several flying to the floor. He straightened, wiped the soup from his face, smoothed his clothes, and lifted his chin to the armed officers who had drawn their guns. Don't make a move, he said, calm and icy. I'll go with you. Chapter 14. Old Coin. Tony's eyes snapped open. For a second, he lay there in the half-dark and tried to place the familiar ceiling above him. The tension in his muscles eased slowly. Jarvis, he murmured. A polite voice answered from somewhere in the room. Sir, I'm here. Turn on the lights. Right away. The bedroom flooded with light. Tony squinted, rubbed his face, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Jarvis, what time is it? 7 in the evening, sir. 7? Already? He had been rescued by the police in the morning and had refused every question, every interview and inspection. He'd come straight home and crashed, but he'd never managed to sleep deeply, waking several times with the sensation that some strange puppet was hiding under the covers. He grabbed a cold beer from the mini-fridge beside the bed, cracked it open, and took a long drink. Then he crossed to the floor-to-ceiling windows. drew the curtains aside, and let the city lights wash over him. A grin spread across his face. "Jarvis? Yes, sir? Good to be back." His stomach protested loudly enough to remind him he needed food. Tony headed for the door and froze when it opened. Two broad-shouldered men in black stood at attention in the hallway. "Hey, who are you? What are you doing in my house?" One of them spoke in a flat tone. "Sir, we are your bodyguards. We've been assigned to protect you." "Protect me? Ha, no thanks." A familiar, small, energetic figure barreled up the stairs. Happy Hogan, Tony's driver and on-the-job bouncer. "Boss, these are top picks from Stark Industries Security. I vetted them myself. They'll keep you safe." Tony put his hands on his hips. "I can handle myself, Happy. Send them away, now." Happy started to argue, then remembered that Tony tended to be stubborn. He waved the extra guards back, and when they left, followed Tony down the hall. "Boss, listen, if you don't want the others, you gotta let me stay. I'm your bodyguard. You know I'm a strong boxer." He struck a few goofy boxing poses as he spoke. Tony's expression softened. He stopped, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Put out your hand." "Huh? Oh, okay." Happy stretched out his pudgy palm without question. Tony held it, and a tremor ran through him. For an instant, images of Happy doing little things, moments he'd never consciously remembered, flickered in Tony's mind. Happy noticed his boss's pause. "You all right, boss?" "I'm fine," Tony lied, letting go and giving the man a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Happy, have you ever met a red-haired woman named Natasha?" "Nope. Can't say that I have." "Well, when you do, for the love of God, don't show off your boxing moves. It won't do you any favors." Tony clapped him twice on the shoulder and turned away, leaving Happy with a baffled frown. What was that all about? Is the boss still rattled from those damn kidnappers? "Get me some cheeseburgers from the basement. Now. You know where they are." Happy didn't need a second invitation. He read Tony's tone and smile and headed off to fetch the burgers, oblivious to the cryptic warning. Tony changed into something less formal and headed for the basement, his workshop, his lab, the center of everything he did. He ate the only dry food left in the house, then set to work. During last night's abduction, he had experienced something odd, glimpses, a sense of knowing things before they happened. The simplest way to test whether the ability was real, he thought, was to recreate the thing he'd seen, the armor that had flashed through his head. Rather than wait for fate to prove him right, Tony leaned into what he knew best, engineering. If the suit had been a kernel of tech, he could reverse engineer it from the model in his mind. He stretched, opened his workbench terminal, and said, "Jarvis, cancel all previous tasks. We're starting a major project." "Understood, sir." Across town, in an ordinary apartment, Levi watched Tony's activity feed with a small, satisfied smile. So he did it. He started building the suit. He let a thoughtful pause hang in the air. Let's spare a moment of silence for Obadiah and the rest of the Ten Commandments crowd. If Obadiah followed through on his plan, he wouldn't just be dealing with a pampered playboy, he'd be tangling with Iron Man. "Good thing we didn't hand him full clairvoyance," Levi mused to the woman in the chair opposite him. She had once played Billy the Puppet in a film and now lounged in the room like a shadow of a different life. If Tony had genuine predictive power, he could have rewritten the whole Marvel world before we even got involved. They both knew the truth. Tony didn't suddenly possess supernatural foresight. Levi had processed a chunk of Marvel-related memories, repackaged them, and slipped them into Tony's subconscious. Those memory triggers had produced the visions Tony experienced. For the system, the cost was trivial, 18 reputation points. It was almost a steal. "I am not a complete fool," the other Levi, his clone, said, folding his hands. The clone and the original shared memories and thoughts in a way that made words almost unnecessary. The clone had the same sharpness, the same exacting temperament, but he admitted to being cautious. "You can increase their power, fine," he said. "But I need absolute initiative and control. I don't like surprises." The original Lev smiled and nodded. "Understood. I'm an old, wretched coin. We hide, survive, and make it to the end game. Call it cowardice, call it pragmatism. Either way, I don't like dying." The clone snorted at that and grinned. "If you've nothing better to do, there's work to be done. We need a solid, hard-working reporter to spread our story, someone simple who won't think too hard. The reach of our plan depends on him." Okay, the clone said lightly, standing. I'm going out. Enjoy your retirement, boss. He waved at a couple of small figures on the table. Tom and Jerry, clutter or pets, it didn't matter. Then sauntered to the window, unfurled an impossible grin, and flew out into the evening. Tony's workbench glowed downstairs. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, hidden levers were being nudged by hands that preferred to stay unseen. The game was starting. Chapter 15, Journalists and Parchment. The Global Times office hummed with the low chaos of a newsroom. Phones rang, copy editors cursed typewriters that weren't theirs, and the editor-in-chief's door stayed shut. Eddie, I need a first-hand source, the editor barked when the young reporter poked his head in. I'm sorry, sir, I don't have one yet. You know, Tony Stark hates interviews, especially from men. Save the excuses. I don't care how you get it, only that you do. This story's on the world's front pages. Can you get it or not? If not, I'll give it to someone else. Aye, go get Caroline. Eddie left the office and found Caroline by the window, a tall blonde who smiled like she knew she could charm the whole city. Caroline, the editor-in-chief wants you in. Me? Why? She squeaked, half delighted. Is he mad at me? Eddie forced a smile and shook his head. Probably not. It's probably good. Thanks, Eddie, she replied as she turned away, already pleased with herself. Eddie trudged back to his desk with a sour look. He was one of the paper's star reporters, hard-working, serious. The assignment should have been his. That it was being handed to Caroline, purely because she was a woman Stark might tolerate, left him hot with resentment. Damn Tony Stark, he muttered under his breath. Why are his preferences so rigid? He couldn't bear watching Caroline parade the scoop, so he grabbed his bag and left. The street outside had slipped into late evening. The alleyways were dim, the lamps guttered with tired light. A gust of wind blew dust across his face. As he lifted a hand to shield his eyes, something flapped against him. A piece of parchment, old-looking and stiff, stuck to his cheek. Startled, Eddie peeled it off, tossed it to the ground and stamped on it. Really? He muttered. Even paper's picking on me tonight. As he turned to walk away, a line of writing on the parchment caught his eye. He crouched and read, Eddie, do you want to know the inside story of Tony Stark's kidnapping? Whose idea of a joke is this? He said into the empty alley, glancing around. Nobody was there. The feeling of being watched crept up his spine. He abandoned the parchment and went home in a hurry. Lights on, he sank onto his couch and exhaled. He hadn't been sitting more than a minute when he noticed another piece of parchment lying on his coffee table. The same line stared back. Eddie, do you want to know the inside story of Tony Stark's kidnapping? My God, didn't I throw that away? He jumped up and retreated to the far side of the room, heart pounding. He watched the table for a long minute until nothing else happened, and he calmed enough to approach the paper again. Okay, prankster, he said aloud, half to himself, half to whatever voice had sent the parchment. I'm a devoted Catholic, but I don't appreciate ghostly props. You asked if I wanted to know. Of course I do. Now show me something. The parchment didn't move. Eddie laughed nervously. It had to be someone's stunt. He picked it up and, after a moment's hesitation, pulled a pen from his jacket and scrawled beneath the printed question, Yes, I want to know. The ink settled and dried. Then, astonishingly, more words appeared below his sentence, forming a long paragraph as if being typed by an invisible hand. Eddie watched, chest tight, until the text stopped. He put the parchment down, grabbed a soda, and swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. Whatever had just happened felt extraordinary and dangerous. His mind already made the choice. He had to be where the story was unfolding. I'm going to the Stark Industries press conference tomorrow, he told the empty living room, a new resolve settling in. Tony Stark blinked at his lab lights with the stubborn grin of a man who'd pushed a problem past its breaking point and come out on top. On a bench lay a palm-sized device, pulsing with white and blue light, a miniature arc reactor. It wasn't as huge as the reactor that powered Stark Industries, but it was more than a novelty. It was the heart of the next suit, the compact power source for something that would move like a person and think like a weapon. He had finished the steel frame for the armor. The rest would be refinement. He stretched, yawned, and left the workshop. In the living room, Happy Hogan was sprawled on the couch, holding a pillow and snoring softly. Tony chuckled. Pepper, I'm amazed you made it through the whole visit without waking him. Pepper Potts, already relaxing with earplugs tucked in, smiled as she eased them out. Because I wore earplugs, she said dryly. She accepted a bottle Tony handed her. Are you okay? You look tired. Fine, a little sleep will fix the rest. Tony took a long drink, the cold soda washing away some of his exhaustion. How's Rhodes? Pepper's face softened. I checked on him, only minor skin injuries. He'll be fine after a few days of rest. That's great, a toast then. Tony raised his bottle. Pepper matched him with a smile. She hesitated, then the smile faded. I watched the video, she said quietly. It's clear you were forced. Still, holding a press conference might be smart. Get ahead of any manipulation. Don't let whoever did this control the narrative. Tony shrugged, a trace of self-consciousness giving way to his usual bravado. Do what you have to do. People protect themselves in a crisis. No shame in that. Besides, I saved you in the end. I don't owe anyone an explanation. Pepper's shoulders tightened for a second, then she gave a small shake of the head. I'm not quitting. I'm just disappointed. Maybe I expected too much. They fell quiet. Happy stirred, wiped at his mouth, and blinked. Did I miss anything good? No, Tony said, amused. You were a perfect sleeping machine. It'd be better if you didn't sound like a chainsaw while doing it. Tony rose. I'm going to catch up on some sleep. We'll talk about the press conference after I nap. Tony, wait, Pepper called after him. I've told the reporters to be at headquarters at 10 in the morning. Let them wait, Tony said over his shoulder. We can give them a little incentive later if they complain. Pepper shrugged and smiled at Happy. A boss who treats his team like that, what a blessing, right? Totally, Happy said with mock solemnity, then cupped his hand lower, a touch of genuine curiosity in his tone. Do I really snore that loud? A bit, Pepper admitted, and the three of them eased into a tired, uneasy laugh that sounded almost like peace. End of chapter. Chapter 16. A Real Man Can Bend and Stretch. Tony didn't sleep well that night. He woke just after 11, unwilling to throw the rest of the day away in bed. He slid out of the room and found Happy in the living room, clutching a takeout box like it was treasure. Boss, want some lunch? Happy offered, pointing. Tony nodded slowly and glanced around. Happy followed his look. Pepper's already at the headquarters, he said. She told me to wait until you were up and then bring you right over. Okay. After a quick, uneventful meal, Tony dressed in a sharp suit, fixed his hair, and climbed into Happy's car. They tore through Manhattan and soon pulled up at Stark Industries. Reporters were gathered in a swarm at the entrance. Stark had called a press conference, and the crowd had exploded into the kind of frenzy that could have made a car into a news headline all by itself. Security moved like a practiced current, and in less than 5 minutes, they opened a safe lane for Happy to drive through. Those guys are nuts, Happy said as they pulled up. Have you figured out what you're going to say yet? Tony blinked. Say what? He hadn't been thinking about speeches. His mind kept returning, stubbornly, to the suit. Pepper's probably prepared something for you, Happy added. Of course she has. Pepper's always prepared. He had plans of his own, though. He wasn't going to read anyone else's lines. The moment he stepped from the car, Tony narrowed his eyes. Obadiah Stane had been waiting, smiling, arms open as if for a hug. Tony, good to see you. I was worried. Tony held his arms up to block the embrace and sneered. Funny, I was worried for you too. Obadiah forced his smile. Happy, why don't you go ahead? Tony and I should talk for a minute. No thanks. I don't need to hear anything he has to say. Tony cut him off and walked past. Happy gave Obadiah a puzzled look and followed. Obadiah's expression hardened. For a man used to influence and favors, being dismissed like this felt humiliating. He ground his teeth, swallowed his pride, and hurried after them. He had, after all, learned to bend and stretch when needed. Stabilize Tony for now, he'd tell himself, then find a way to turn the tables. When Tony pressed the elevator button and the doors began to close, Obadiah acted. He pulled Happy out, slipped into the car, and jabbed the door close. Happy was left on the other side, blinking as the elevator sealed. Tony and Obadiah were alone. You're shameless, Tony said. If I were you, I'd resign, find a quiet place to retire, and never show your face here again. Tony, I came to apologize, Obadiah said. He hesitated, then, dramatically, dropped to his knees. It was the kind of gesture that belonged in a melodrama. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have struck you from behind. They threatened me. If I didn't, they would kill me. I have 4 children. The youngest, Jenny, is only 4. You used to play with her. I couldn't let them lose their father." By the time he finished, his eyes were wet and his hands trembled. He put every ounce of contrition into the performance. For a beat, Tony was taken aback. Then he snorted. "You think that gets you a pass?" "Tony," Obadiah went on, pleading, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I only want to stay close and help you so I can atone." Something in Tony snapped. Without warning, he swung. The fist landed hard on the side of Obadiah's face and sent him sprawling to the floor. When Obadiah lifted his head, half his face numb and smeared with blood, Tony stood over him, oddly blank for a moment before the expression hardened. "I returned that punch," Tony said coldly. "No second chances. Understand?" The elevator dinged and the doors opened. Tony stepped out, glanced back once, and added, "By the way, you have terrible taste." He walked away, and under his breath, where only Obadiah could hear, he muttered, "Iron Overlord. What a name." Obadiah didn't fully understand the aside, but he felt the sting of the public hand-to-hand humiliation as small recompense for his earlier betrayal. He wiped the blood from his mouth and watched Tony go, his eyes dark with a promise he hadn't voiced. Who will laugh last is still up in the air, he thought. Backstage, Pepper let out a long breath the moment she saw Tony. "There you are. Here, this is the speech I wrote. Want me to change anything?" Tony took the pages, skimmed them once, then balled them up and tossed them into the trash. "Nope, mine's better." "Yours?" Pepper scolded, half relieved, half exasperated. "Tony, now is not the time to improvise." "Relax, I'm serious," Tony said, flashing a grin that barely masked his focus. "Don't worry, just leave it to me." He pushed through the curtain and walked onto the stage as 1,000 flashes erupted. He patted the microphone and scanned the sea of lenses, half entertained by the spectacle. "Hungry guys? You all look great," he quipped, then lifted a hand theatrically toward the crowd. "All right, cameras, make me look good. Ready?" He paused, giving them the build-up he loved. And, with his trademark swagger and a deliberately insolent grin, Tony raised his middle finger and aimed it into the lenses. "See, Billy?" he said. "I swear I'll find you and kick your ass." The flashes kept going. The room filled with the sound of 1,000 pens and 1,000 phones. Tony Stark had the world's attention, on his own terms. Chapter 17. Meeting Coulson. "Mr. Stark, who is Billy? Do you stand by your earlier confession? Are you truly sorry? Many people say they don't believe you've changed. Do you have confidence?" Tony ignored the shrill chorus of questions and walked off the stage. He'd come to the press conference to declare war on that damned puppet, not to spar with a pack of reporters. If he wanted to be a headline, he could be, but right now, he was eager to get back to the lab and finish the suit. He winked at Pepper as he left. She rolled her eyes and moved to the podium with a practiced, exasperated sigh. "Everyone, please be patient," she said, quiet and steady. "Mr. Stark is feeling unwell at the moment. I'll be reading his statement." A few reporters bristled, Eddie in particular, who had paid his way in and hoped to leverage insider dirt on Stark into a scoop. Tony disappearing in the middle of the conference left him holding a hot tip with no headline. He grumbled, and in the end, sold his info anonymously for cash. Fame slipped through his fingers, but at least it bought lunch. Tony was ready to go home with Happy when a pair of unexpected guests blocked their path. One of them flashed an ID with a warm, easy smile. "Tony Stark? We're with the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, S-Healed. We have a few questions." "What bureau?" Tony asked, feigning confusion, scratching his ear. "Coulson," the man supplied, extending his hand. "Just call me Coulson." Tony shook his hand, curious despite himself. "Can you spare a moment? We want to ask about your kidnapping the night before last." At the mention of the kidnapping, Tony closed his eyes. He hadn't expected to be interviewed by men in suits about that night. But the moment the topic arrived, a rush of images hammered into his head, names and faces he'd never heard of before. Fury, the Hulk, a hammer, aliens. It was like a flash of someone else's map of the world. He opened his eyes and met Coulson's steady gaze. "Sorry," he admitted, rubbing his temple. "I haven't been sleeping well these last couple of days. A little dizzy, but I'll cooperate." Coulson nodded. The agent was experienced enough to know when to give someone space. Good. We'll keep it short. Why don't we go somewhere private to talk? In the reception room, with other agents posted outside, Tony sat across from Coulson and told a trimmed version of the story. He skipped the near-death bit and stuck to what he'd seen after being taken. He sipped coffee and finished. That's about it. Any leads? Can you catch that bastard soon? Coulson kept his expression neutral. Your information has been very helpful. We're pursuing the leads. So you have a suspect? We've arrested the owner of an underground room, Jin Bing. He's a gang leader who may be colluding with the perpetrator. Tony jotted the name down. Anything else? Sorry, that's all I can share, Coulson said. Some of this is confidential. Tony prodded. What do you mean by strange incidents? Events that can't be explained by conventional means, Coulson answered, then softened a little. For example, the abnormal darkness you described isn't something our regular theories cover. That could be done with technology, Tony said, shrugging. Not everything supernatural has to be supernatural. It doesn't happen often, Coulson replied. When Tony asked about other recent cases, Coulson fell silent. Confidentiality shielded some things even from a blunt force genius like Stark. Tony felt the conversation reach its limit. All right, I need to go home and rest, Agent Coulson. You have what I know. Coulson watched him get up. He's a stubborn one, he murmured to the agent beside him as Tony left. Then he picked up a phone. Director, your fears were right. Back at home, the stream of new strange information sat heavy on Tony's shoulders. The world hid far more than he had ever imagined. Obadiah's betrayal suddenly seemed petty by comparison. If bizarre events and unknown powers were real, he needed to be ready. He needed the suit. No, a better suit. He needed to be Iron Man in the truest sense. No, he muttered to the camera in the workshop. I need to be stronger. Better than even the guy I saw. He looked up at the ceiling camera. Jarvis had to be upgraded. S-Shield's databases probably held files on things the public hadn't been told about. And Jarvis could help him hunt down Billy. Revenge was tempting, but the priority was clear. Perfect the armor. Jarvis, come online. Yes, sir, the familiar voice replied. Chapter 18. Norman Osborn. Reputation value 4,782. Levi, sitting at his post in the security room, hadn't expected Tony to be so cooperative. When the live feeds rolled and Tony casually dropped the name Billy on air, thousands learned of him in an instant. Levi watched his reputation spike, more than 20,000 points in a single sweep. With reporter Eddie amplifying the story, the image of Puppet Billy would only get richer and more specific. Reputation points would keep coming. At this rate, the fourth talent will unlock soon, Levi thought with a smile. He couldn't hide his satisfaction. Greater renown meant more power, and more power meant he could make bolder plans. Spread out. We don't need so many people cluttering up small New York. Our target is the wide world beyond. He made the decision, and the clones followed it without question. They left for their assigned locations across the country. Only 2 clones remained in the New York base. One would keep up the daily ghost story performances. The other had a more important task. Austin Group, top floor conference room. Chairman Norman Osborn sat in the main seat while his assistant rattled through a presentation. Norman's smile was plastered on, but his eyes were restless. Beside him, a stern old man in uniform, General Ross, finally cut in, impatient and suspicious. Don't give me excuses, Osborn. I just want one thing. When will your human enhancement serum be ready? Norman had expected the question and kept his smile. General Ross, rest assured, our enhancement serum has reached its final stage. If we correct the last defect, we can begin human trials. Ross's cold gaze pinned him. Norman felt it as pressure against his chest, but he kept his composure. After a long, tense moment, Ross spoke again. I'll give you 1 week. If I don't see real progress in 7 days, withdraw your requests for our funding. You know the consequences. Ross had every reason to be on edge. He had poured his energy into a super soldier project of his own, dreaming of an unbeatable force. Years ago, the experiment that had seemed promising, Bruce Banner, turned into a green monster, nearly killing Ross's daughter and leaving a trail of devastation. Ross hadn't abandoned the project. Instead, he allied with Norman's Oscorp-era Austin Group, investing heavily to revive the company and even handing over secrets about the serum that created Captain America 50 years earlier. Years had gone by with no concrete results. It was no wonder Ross was furious. Norman nodded. Understood. We'll have results in a week. See that you do. Ross rose and left with his men. Once the room cleared, Norman sagged back into his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. His assistant hovered nearby, worry creasing his face. Chairman, it's only a week. How can we fix the genetic instability? We don't have a clue. Norman's jaw tightened. I won't let the Austin group die on my watch. He slammed his hand on the table and forced his voice to steel. Work every hour of the next week. Don't go home until this is fixed. Understood. Days blurred into a trench of failed trials. The 103rd animal experiment failed. The 112th failed. The 117th failed. Norman watched the little white mice in the incubator dead from genetic collapse and felt his stomach turn. 2 days of sleepless effort had yielded nothing. 5 days remained. Success in that window would require a miracle. He laughed once, bitter. A miracle. Chairman? I'm fine. Keep at it. Take a break if you must. Norman sounded calm but felt hollow. He wandered back to his office like a man sleepwalking, stared into a full-length mirror and saw a gray-haired, hollow-eyed version of himself. He clenched his fists and pulled at his hair. What am I supposed to do? A voice answered, soft and sudden. I can help you. Norman startled, spun around, and saw no one. He frowned and wondered if exhaustion was finally catching up with him. Look here, idiot! I'm here! The voice came from the mirror. The reflection looked up and that smile was wrong. Too smug, too confident. Norman took an involuntary step back. Who are you? He asked, voice trembling. The reflection smiled. I'm you, Norman Osborn. You're me? The man in the mirror laughed, the sound slick with contempt. Yes, but I'm not as useless. I can fix your serum problem. All you have to do is come here and put your hand on the glass. Norman groped for reason. You can help me? Help the Austin group? Do you have any other hope? The reflection taunted. It's simple. Put your hand on the mirror. Your worries will vanish. Your problems solved. There was nothing left to cling to. Norman nodded slowly and, as if drawn by gravity, walked toward the mirror and pressed his hand to the cold surface. The room tilted. The world spun. Darkness swallowed him. When his senses returned, he found himself trapped in a dim space with a single rectangular band of light in front of him. Beyond that rectangle was a familiar office, and in it stood another version of him, grinning with cruel satisfaction. Younger, stronger, useful, the man said aloud. Norman's mouth opened. You locked me in here? You did this. Bingo, the other replied. No reward. I will help you, but the price is your body. No, I won't give it up. Give me back my body, Norman screamed. The man in the office, no longer just a reflection, turned toward a secure wall safe. He was fluid and practiced. He punched the code, pressed his thumb to the scanner, and withdrew a small test tube filled with a viscous green serum. Norman watched, stunned. The man uncorked the vial and downed it in one gulp. Sweet. Under Norman's horror, the changes were immediate. Hair darkened and became lustrous, wrinkles smoothed, his posture righted. The man looked decades younger. All the years of stress wiped away in an instant. He flexed his fingers and laughed. You see? What's a mouse compared to a human? This serum has to be used on humans to work. Now, we'll finally have something to show General Ross. Norman pressed his hands to the glass from where he was trapped. He could only watch as the man, his body, but not his soul, turned away and walked out of the office, leaving Norman inside, helpless and hollow-eyed. The man who had once been Levi's clone and who now wore Norman Osborn's face and authority had won. In the dim space, the real Norman slumped, fury and despair warring in his chest as the office door closed on his stolen life. Chapter 19. Clone in Action, Brazil. The slums. Sweat slicked his hair to his forehead as the young man opened his eyes. His training had finally ended. His name was Bruce Banner. Ever since the gamma-ray accident, his body reacted to anger, or even the smallest surge of excitement, by transforming him into a terrifying green monster that demolished everything in its path. To protect others and avoid General Ross's hunt, he'd fled here, trying to heal himself and learn to control his emotions. Progress had been slow. The memory of almost killing the person he loved ate at him. He hated the monster inside him. I'm a man, not a monster. Get out of my body. A sharp beep from his heartbeat monitor cut through that thought like a needle. Banner's breath hitched. He forced himself to breathe deeply, to calm the rising rage, and finally pushed the Hulk back down. "Calm," he whispered to himself, exhaling until his shoulders dropped. He lay back on the rough floor, exhausted, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes. When would this nightmare end? A knock sounded at the door. 3 quick, heavy raps. Banner shot upright, fear making him move with the jittery alertness of someone used to running. He edged toward the door and peered through the crack, every nerve taut. He wasn't a man who trusted knocks. Whoever was outside could be soldiers, hunters, anything that would force him to run, to transform. "Who's there?" he called in a small, wary voice. "My name is Jules. I'm a priest. I guide lost souls back to the right path." Banner almost laughed bitterly. A preacher. He wasn't in the mood for sermons or charity. "Sorry, Father. No lost souls here. Please go somewhere else." No, you're the lost one," the man insisted. Before Banner could respond, the handle turned by itself and the door crashed open. Banner lunged to get away and discovered, to his horror, that his hands and feet were bound as if by ropes that had appeared from nowhere. He couldn't move. He could only watch. The man who entered wore a black priest's robe. He looked 30 or 40, with gaunt, angular features and bloodshot eyes. A wild grin stretched his face as he stepped closer. "Look at that body," he murmured, voice trembling with a strange exhilaration. "A gift from God. I can't believe I found one so quickly." He circled Banner like a predator, leaning in now and then to catch his scent. Banner's throat tightened. "You lunatic, let me go now. You'll regret this." "Don't be afraid," the priest crooned. "We're family." He tilted his head and smiled, an expression both tender and terrifying. "You took the wrong path. Don't despise what you are. Understand anger. Control anger. And then become anger." The words hung in the small room, a promise and a threat braided together. Japan, Fukushima nuclear power plant. A man hovered in the air, whistling softly as he studied the rows of white concrete buildings spread out below him. "This is the plant," he said idly. "Looks ordinary enough." At his feet, a 3-meter Komodo dragon flicked its long tongue, intelligent hunger in its slitted eyes. It lashed its tail and scrambled forward on all fours toward the plant's discharge channel. Where the cooling water spilled out, steaming, the creature lunged eagerly into the flow as if into a bath. "Drink," the man encouraged, chuckling. "Drink it down." The Komodo submerged itself, greedily lapping at the warm, tainted water. The man watched with amusement. "Instead of dumping all this waste into the ocean, why not use it to feed you?" he said. "Grow up fast, Godzilla. You're meant to be a king among monsters." He tapped his chin, considering. "A single titan is barely worth the headlines. Why not create a sea monster, too? I just hope the reputation will be enough." The animal's tail thumped against the concrete as it drank, and under the plant's invisible currents, something else began to stir. Sokovia, Eastern Europe. To the untrained eye, the compound that housed Hydra's remnants looked like an ordinary, struggling facility hidden among hills. But that facade belied the dense network of sentries, cameras, and weapons within. A man in a black cloak patterned with red clouds appeared at the gate and, ignoring the alarms and guards, walked straight in. Strangely, none of the agents reacted. Even when he passed directly before them, it was as if they did not see him. He walked through the iron gate without touching it, down a secret corridor, until he reached a small room and looked up at the girl inside. "Who are you?" the girl asked. She was the first person in the base who could see him. He gave her a close, calm look and lowered his head. "My name is Tiandao," he said. His eyes were purple, marked with concentric rings that seemed to glow. "Follow me." For reasons she couldn't explain, Wanda Maximoff obeyed. Tiandao no longer concealed himself. At his command, the agents who had been stationed in the halls put down their weapons and dropped to their knees, faces fixed in a fanatical devotion. The power in the room felt similar to Wanda's, and far stronger. Wanda watched quietly as her brother Pietro and the other children who'd been experimented on in the same way were gathered. Tiandao led them deeper into the heart of the base, and soon they stood in the central control room. Baron Strucker, head of Hydra's Sokovian operations, knelt without a word and swore allegiance. Tiandao sat up on a high chair, looking down at them with an unreadable expression. "You have been in pain for a long time," he said softly. "Because you have suffered what you have, you crave peace. You want this war-ravaged land to know safety. To have that peace, you must become stronger. Stronger than anyone. Let those who harm you or this country pay 10 times the price. 100, 1,000. From now on, no one will dare to touch this place. How do we become stronger? Wanda stepped forward, voicing the question everyone in the room felt. Worship me, Tiandao answered simply. Believe in me. Respect me as a god. He rose, the figure of someone who expected not obedience, but reverence. From this moment, Hydra ends. We shall be Akatsuki. A murmur of agreement ran through the room, the new name settling over them like a promise. The long night ends, Tiandao declared. The light has finally arrived. Okay, the transition and foreshadowing are complete. Now it's time to begin the first major arc, the Patriotic Alliance. The outline lists 4 major chapters. Feel free to read them. Also, the trial push will launch in the next week or 2. Even if you want to read ahead, please make sure to click the latest chapter occasionally. It really helps. Thank you very much.